What's up, everybody? Along with Will Grant, I'm Colin Loughran, and we are two of your NBA beat reporters for this season of basketball here at WFUV Sports. Will with the Brooklyn Nets, myself with the New York Knicks, here to give you a preview of the upcoming season. Other reporters will be joining us along the way during the course of this season, but for right now, me and Will hash it out. Man, it is great to be with you here. Yesterday, obviously, the Warriors and Lakers, Celtics, Sixers getting the party started, but man, oh man, Knicks and Nets, NYC Hoops doesn't get much better than this.
You're so right. It does not get much better than this. We have so many sports going on right now, but my favorite, obviously, is the NBA. Basketball's back, the Knicks kick off, and the Nets kick off, so I'm interested to see how everything works out for the Nets with such a, murky offseason with KD, Kyrie, and then throwing Ben Simmons into the mix, finally getting on the floor this year. But, Colin, what are you thinking? What are you thinking right now for the Nets?
Let's start with those Brooklyn Nets. Last season, obviously, not what they had hoped for. Finished the regular season campaign 44-38, 7th in the Eastern Conference, and then were swept by the Boston Celtics in the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. A whole lot of drama between Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant last season, between vaccines and people not wanting to come to work. Ben Simmons joined the fray halfway through the year. Didn't play, but he figures to be a factor this year. He will be here for a full season. They also added TJ Warren. Seth Curry was added last year at the trade deadline. He gets a full season with the Brooklyn Nets this year as well. Cam Thomas, another year older, another year wiser. Will, for my money, though, the story runs through Kevin Durant early and often. Nobody should feel as embarrassed about last year's performance against the Celtics than Kevin Durant.
Yeah, last year we saw them get swept against Boston. It wasn't the strongest series from Kevin Durant. Obviously, going into their seeding was kind of messed up. They didn't have to play the Celtics, but because they lacked so many, those Kyrie incidents, and then you got Ben Simmons, sitting out, waiting for him to play, KD kind of had to take it on his own. And if they had potentially played another team in that first round, I think they could have gotten a lot farther than they did. But, they ended to the Eastern Conference Finals winners. So, enough to be said there. Going forward, I think that, TJ Warren getting back on that squad or getting introduced to that squad is going to be something that, we aren't going to think about that too much. We're going to think more Ben Simmons, but a seventh guy off the bench like that can really make an impact with, three of an unbelievable cast of players on the same team that we haven't seen in a while.
Royce O'Neal also added to the fold, should help them defensively. I look at Brooklyn this year, and I see a club that needs to be more diverse in terms of their offensive attack. Last year, 4th in field goal percentage during the regular season. We know they can shoot the lights out of the gym. They got the cast of characters that can do it with Durant, even some of those bench guys like Patty Mills, Cam Thomas, Joe Harris when he's healthy. Same deal with Seth Curry and TJ Warren. But there's something to be said about being able to score in transition. And scoring in transition starts on defense. This Nets team was not very good at defense last year. It's part of the reason Boston was able to skewer them every which way, because then on offense, they got into the habit of a whole lot of isolation basketball. So for me, Ben Simmons' role has to be a key defender and a facilitator on offense, someone that will break the monotony of isolation play that KD and Kyrie were prone to last year. So, Will, I look at this club as a whole. They might not be the best team in the East when you look at holistically the Milwaukee Bucks, the Boston Celtics, even Philly would give Brooklyn a run for their money on paper at least. But they might have the most talent in that they have Kevin Durant, they have Kyrie Irving together. And if Ben Simmons is right and he serves as that facilitator and that defender, they can make a run at the East. So I guess what I'd ask you here, what is the floor for the Brooklyn Nets? And then also, if you could, what is the ceiling?
First off, the floor, it's potentially low because we don't really know what we're walking into. Like I said, murky waters from the offseason, Ben Simmons. So with a competitive East, like you said, there's definitely chances for other teams to, climb the way up like the Cavs did last year, surprisingly. And there's just a chance that they might not make the playoffs potentially, but with that talent, I can't see a scenario where they're not, 4th to 7th in the East finishing up at the end of the season. This team, like we've talked about off air before, they're very, they have these runs where they win a few games, drop a few games. A lot of that due to last year because of a lot of people out. So I think that the floor definitely is pretty low because you don't really know what you're doing. You're throwing a bunch of wild animals into a cage and seeing how that they can work together to be a unit. But definitely, I think the ceiling is very high. You saw Ben Simmons in these preseason games. We haven't seen him in so long, but you see him now. He's developing this sort of floater, but also when he drives to the basket, a 6'10" guy who can go there, has the dribbling skills, has the moves. If he's able to dish out to these other guys, even the young ones, aside from KD and Kyrie, I think that they can have a very explosive offense, and they're definitely going to have to work together more this year. There's going to be less ISO, and I'm very interested to see how Steve Nash implements his playing time with each of these players. You got Seth Curry, a developing Cam Thomas, Nick Claxton, who received tons of minutes last year in the postseason and was very beneficial for them. But for now, there's a lot of questions to be asked.
Nick Claxton will get a whole lot more responsibility in the paint, especially since the Nets lost LaMarcus Aldridge over the offseason.
Right.
They're looking at Claxton as the main guy in the paint early and often. Blake Griffin, obviously now a member of the Celtics and not the Brooklyn Nets, so really Claxton going to have to step up there. I look at this team, that might be one of the bigger questions for me entering this campaign is who's going to really man the middle. You would like to see some of that from Ben Simmons given his physicality and ability to play tough when necessary. Now, his willingness to do so is an entirely different question. But if Claxton and Simmons can play physically on the interior, you would think everything else would start to come together very naturally on the offensive side of the ball, assuming everybody is healthy, and health will be a big, big factor down the stretch.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, being healthy for this team is everything. I mean, if they're going to work as a unit, like I said before, and one guy just isn't able to play, or several games he's not able to play, there's definitely a shift in tone. Like what is going to happen? Who's going to facilitate? Who is going to lack in their game because another player that benefits their style of play isn't there to mutually assure that they can do that. And scoring right now seems to be their number one facet with skills. They were number 10 last year in scoring in the league, but like you said, the defense was 20th. So if Ben Simmons can really, get in the middle and Claxton can clog it too, there's definitely an opportunity for them to, potentially better that ranking from 20th. But what do you think when you just said Ben Simmons, he can be a huge defensive threat in the middle and play big? Do you think that he has the capability to play big?
I think he does. I think size-wise,
right,
he does. Now, what I did caveat that with is his willingness to do so is an entirely new question, but there's no way you want him strictly playing on the perimeter, given the manpower this team has, or lack thereof, at least in terms of centers and forwards. This is a very guard-heavy team. Something they talked about last year when they played Boston was Brooklyn had a tendency to play small, simply because they had to. I look at Ben Simmons and I see someone that can really contribute on that end of the court defensively. He can grab you some rebounds, and Lord knows they're going to need that. I don't know if he's necessarily Shaquille O'Neal down there. I mean, of course he's not going to be, but he can give you something, and something is better than nothing, and him being there is better than him not being there. So a whole lot of questions for the Brooklyn Nets. Almost went to a title 2 years ago, but as we know, my friend, almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. So with that, let's move up towards Manhattan and talk about those New York Knicks. Man, last year was a disappointment for the Knicks. 2 years ago, they overachieved. So last season, the expectation for Tom Thibodeau and company was, okay, they'll be back in the playoffs. This is not going to be an issue. Derrick Rose gets hurt. Other guys don't contribute in the way that they should. Mitchell Robinson experiences some growing pains. R.J. Barrett, a bright spot. Thibodeau didn't play Manuel Quickley and Obi Toppin to the extent that some fans would have liked him to. This year, though, you add Jalen Brunson, a new point guard to the fray. You add Isaiah Hartenstein. Yeah, you lose Nerlens Noel, but at the end of the day, the Knicks are looking a little bit better this year given the fact that you added that main point guard. If I'm looking at this team, and I'll take first crack here, I see one that could be at least on that play-in fringe. I think they can make a run for a play-in bid Whether or not they grab it will be dependent on their ability to come together and play cohesively as a unit. But they'll definitely be better than last season when they finished 37 and 45, 11th in that Eastern Conference. To me, the addition of Brunson really helps this club, even with the loss of other guards like Alec Burks.
Right, and that bright spot, like you mentioned before, R.J. Barrett, I think that, if we're talking about ceilings, his is unbelievably high. The guy's a game changer. He knows how to drive. He knows how to shoot. And there's something that is true of what you said before with that momentum swing. They come off being the 4th seed in the East, lose in horrible fashion to the Hawks 2 years ago. They come back, everyone's thinking, oh, they're coming in, 4th seed, sky's the limit. And I think that the Knicks embody themselves in Julius Randle's play a little bit, because last year, that year he came off most improved player. He's got a little pep in his step. He's pretty happy in the offseason, comes in floating, and things didn't work out the way they thought they would, and the same thing goes with the New York Knicks. I mean, they didn't even make the playoffs, and they were a 4 seed in a very competitive East. So if I'm looking at it from a perspective of, if they can gel together and make this thing work, I think that Jalen Brunson is a pretty good candidate to shift the culture in Madison Square Garden.
I think the combination of Brunson and a healthy Derrick Rose could be deadly, given it's going to be rare that those guys will be on the court at the same time. You typically would want one of them manning that point position, but just the idea that Rose could get a little bit more rest will help him dramatically, and having Brunson there obviously helps. You mentioned Julius Randle, 20.1 points per game last season, but there were times, man, where he was dribbling the ball very erratically. He won an isolation play. He would blow off RJ or Quickly or Obi or whoever it was and just take a half-baked shot. That can't happen. And I think now having a real point guard, and yes, I did say a real point guard, Alec Burks doesn't count, will help Julius Randle's play, because this is going to be one of those years where you look at him and say, you are not the guy. In fact, nobody's the guy on this year's Knicks. Now, we understand RJ Barrett's ceiling. He's getting better and better every year. He's going to get even better this year, but it's too much to ask RJ to be everything and anything this year. Julius Randle, same deal. He's a very talented player, but he is not that guy. He's not LeBron. He's not Giannis or KD. You're not going to put the bulk of offensive burden on him or even Evan Fournier in the same way you attempted to do last year. Because when Fournier got hot, he was hot. But when he was cold, man, he was ice cold. So I look at the New York Knicks. They're a team that has to pass the ball. They have to be very generous in terms of their offensive output. It can't be that one guy is controlling every sense of the game or ruling the roost, so to speak. Can they do that? That is a different question. Now, a lot of that's going to come down to Thibodeau, and a lot of that's going to come down to defensive play. Last year on defense, they took a step backwards. That was a calculated step backwards, because when you sign Evan Fournier, you're accepting the fact that one of your guards is going to be a defensive liability. 2 years ago, when they made that Cinderella run, their defense was really strong. That was kind of the hallmark of the whole operation. They weren't very good offensively. In fact, there were stretches where they wouldn't get buckets, and they were really slow to set up from the half court. Last year, 30th in assists. That can't happen. If the defense gets better this year, and Coach Tom, if you play Obi Toppin and Emmanuel Quickly, and you have the good defense, you're going to get more assists because you're going to get more transition buckets. So this Knicks team is going to be a product of how they mesh as a unit, not one guy taking over the operation. I think I'm somewhat on the right track with that assessment.
No, I think you are, definitely. And, we talked about these guards, the wings, ability to play defense, but then you got to look into Mitchell Robinson. He's back for a fully healthy season, missed a ton of games last year, and also over the offseason, they lost Taj Gibson and Nerlens Noel, who kind of served as his backup, because Mitchell Robinson is a guy who can rim protect, but at a cost. He can gather a ton of fouls. He can get as many as 3 or 4 in the first half. And then what do? It's interesting because this guy, Isaiah Hartenstein, if that's correct, he seems to protect the rim pretty well. So going forward from here, how do you think that their bigs are going to operate this season?
Well, you extended Mitchell Robinson knowing he's going to be your guy going forward. Now, obviously, there's aspects of Mitch's game that I would like to see him improve upon. I think the points total has to go up, and I think that's a product of him really being more aggressive when he gets an offensive rebound. There's times where he kind of just throws it back out towards the top of the perimeter. I'd like to see him just take it back up. And as far as Hardy goes, Knicks fans going to love this kid because he is a very good rim protector, very good defender. Can also hit a three, if I'm not mistaken, every once in a while. It's not like you would bank on it happening, but he's the type of guy that's going to get the fans going. He's a gritty type of player that really will energize the bunch when they need to be energized. You mentioned just overall this team and the trajectory. Trajectory in the Knicks is something that is a common discussion year over year, where it's kind of like this never-ending roller coaster, man. Where are we in agreement in the fact that they're going to be in the play-in conversation? And I'll caveat that question to you. What role, if any, are the kids going to play in that?
Well, like you said before, if Tibbs decides to throw these young guys in, Obi and Emmanuel Quickley are essentially sparks. There's a ton of, not stagnant, but not as much movement as they want on the floor. And I feel like these guys can really just run the floor. They can get assists up, like you said, and they can contribute positively by being a fresh breath. They can be an 8 or 9 spot on the bench, depending on how this year turns out. But in the playoffs, if we're saying, let's throw Obi in, get some energy, spark everything up, and then IQ can lead that up with some threes. Those young guys have tons and tons of, powerful energy that can motivate everybody to not necessarily play better, but play more strong and play as a cohesive unit.
I see Emmanuel Quickley. I think of a kid that just has all the energy in the world and is not ready to go to sleep. He's just a energizer bunny type of player. 11.4 points per game over the course of his career. I think you're right. There's something to be said about the fact that these kids can really just give the Knicks a jolt when push comes to shove. Will be interesting to see what happens with those New York Knicks and your Brooklyn Nets, Will. I'm looking forward to covering the beat with you this year. I know it's going to be an absolute blast in the NBA. That will do it for us and our New York City Hoops preview. Along with Will Grant, I'm Colin Loughran saying so long.